Conventional approach really is very deficient and will often leave people with cognitive deficits or what we call a decline in brain reserve, because we all have a certain amount of brain reserve whether we're a kid or an adult. But if there's brain injury and if it's not taken care of appropriately, then the person's brain reserve can go down. And if it goes down enough, they'll start having symptoms. It's been found that even in football players, if they draw their blood within 1 or 2 hours of slamming their head, they can start having antibodies to their own blood-brain barrier. And so one of the things that I'll frequently do is get a blood test to see if this person has antibodies to their own blood-brain barrier, because the blood-brain barrier is supposed to keep things out of the brain, and if it's increasingly permeable, it will let toxins in the brain and things in the brain that just shouldn't be getting in there that can damage the brain. So one of the functional medicine approaches that I've developed is assessing whether the blood-brain barrier has been damaged or there can actually be antibodies to the blood-brain barrier, and then having a treatment program to heal the blood-brain barrier.
As with any condition, optimizing nutrition can be a powerful intervention when treating traumatic brain injury.
Then, in terms of the functional medicine approach that I've developed, it's looking at, okay, is there a lot of neural inflammation? And there almost always is. So how do we find the sources of neural inflammation, like in the GI tract in the gut, and actually treat the gut when we're concerned about the brain, and then also treat the brain? Like there are some things that can actually pass into the brain, like there's a form of curcumin that passes in the brain better than some other forms that can actually decrease neural inflammation, and there's some other things that can do it too. So I've sort of devised a program that incorporates the right supplements to do these things based on the research, as well as brain training, because brain training is the main thing that will create the synaptic connections, as well as incorporating exercise to increase brain-derived nerve growth factor, as well as using some modalities like frequency-specific microcurrent that is applied that can actually heal areas of the brain. And also other things, because when someone has a brain injury, the hormones can be affected. So that I want to look at all the hormone levels and make sure they're tuned up, because sometimes the actual pituitary gets damaged and all the output from the pituitary can go down and the person may not have the hormones that they need. So that has to be addressed. And then stress management is extremely important, because often people are very stressed after this type of injury. One of the things that's really important after any kind of head injury, whether a kid, slips skiing or falls off their bike, or an adult falls off a horse, or whatever it is, or an auto accident, is we want to decrease inflammation in the diet. And how do you do that? Well, you decrease fried foods and breaded foods and eliminate all trans fats in the diet, and also sort of have people eat like a low glycemic index diet where they're not eating a lot of starches and breads. But there's some other things that they can do. They should go on a gluten-free diet even if they don't have antibodies to gluten, because there's information that some of the molecules in gluten can create an autoimmune process in the brain if the blood-brain barrier is having a problem. There are some molecular sequences in gluten and in dairy that can damage the brain after a brain injury, so everybody needs to go on a completely dairy-free, gluten-free diet for about 8 weeks. I always say about 8 to 10 weeks is what's called the critical period after a brain injury, when we need to do this kind of dietary intervention in a big way. I put everybody on wild blueberries. And what's really interesting is that there are biochemicals in blueberries that help heal the brain after brain injury, that are even also good if someone wants to prevent dementia and other things. But wild blueberries have this purple pigment. And what's funny is, like, if you're ever, unwrapping a pack of wild blueberries and you get some on your fingers, it stains your fingers purple because of this pigment in there is so strong. But wild blueberries have many times that pigment than a regular blueberry, because what's really interesting is the more stressed out the plant is, the more of this protective pigment it produces. I also put them on a regular diet of a lot of cruciferous vegetables.
To me, the foundation for exercise is to do aerobic training in the form of high-intensity interval training, and again, because of the blood flow, because of the impact that it does to all of the great brain chemicals, and because it really gets, it also increases your brain volume, it increases your growth factors, so it gets everything growing, moving, and communicating in your brain.
When treating traumatic brain injury, it's important to consider alternative therapies such as hyperbaric oxygen and neurofeedback.
Hyperbaric oxygen increases the oxygenation level in the brain. And one of the theories is that there's some decrease in oxygenation in the brain because of the damage to blood vessels and the decreased ability to get oxygen in the brain. Oxygen functions in cells to help create energy. That's one of the biggest ways it functions.
I think that neurofeedback is going to probably be the one thing in psychiatry that's going to change the way we approach what we do. The way that we talk about it is in terms of operant conditioning. So what is that? Basically, it started because Sternman had this cat. This is one of the researchers who did this originally, and had an electrode in the cat's head. And there was this traditional thing where the cat would hit a bar and food would come out. Well, he paired a noise with that. And so the cat knew as long as the noise was on, if he hit the bar, nothing was going to come out. So he would sit there very still. And he observed through the electrode that when he was sitting still and focused, this certain brainwave pattern came up, which was interesting to him because it was a 12 to 15 hertz brainwave pattern that basically kept him very still and focused. And so he wanted to see if he could get the cat to produce that brainwave pattern on his own without the noise. And lo and behold, the cat learned how to produce the brainwave on his own so the food would be delivered. Well, that's actually what we're doing in neurofeedback. We put on a 19-channel cap, which has several electrodes on it, and we will record the brain, all the brainwave patterns, with eyes closed and eyes open. And then we'll compare it to a normal database. So, for instance, in what happened with the veteran who came in with PTSD and traumatic brain injury, we targeted the areas of the brain that we knew would be abnormal for those conditions, the symptoms that would be abnormal for those conditions. And then when he came back in, we decided we were going to just program it to look at those areas. And he would look at a car on a racetrack, for instance. And every time the right brain wave occurred by chance, the car would move. So the brain gets excited and goes, oh my gosh, where did that come from? And so it looks for it again. And eventually the patient is learning how to make that car move. Once they've done that, we can extend the amount of time that they're holding it until the brainwave patterns go back to normal.
When it comes to brain disorders or any health challenges, having a miracle mindset is key. Up next, we'll talk about the 7 keys to an ultra mind. I'll take all the information we've learned in this docuseries and condense it into a comprehensive plan that you can start today so that you can get one step closer to healing your broken brain. See you there.